Chapter 17. Puzzling Paper. After thoroughly searching the vacant house, Carson, Drew, and Ned were ready to give up. They had found no trace of Nancy. "I was so sure she was here," the lawyer declared. He and Ned had reached the attic floor, which was dark and suffocatingly stuffy. But maybe she was taken to another hideout. "Listen," Ned said. They could hear a distinct scratching noise, as if someone were clawing against a plaster wall. Tracing the sound, Mr. Drew saw a door in a dingy corner of the room. "Maybe she's in there," he exclaimed, pulling at the knob. Nancy, bound and gagged, stared in disbelief. Ned tore off the handkerchief while Mr. Drew untied her bonds. "Are you okay?" he asked apprehensively. "You look pale." "I'm all right," she assured him and her father. "But I'm afraid we've run into a real calamity." "What do you mean?" Mr. Drew asked. "The Browns made me write a note to Hannah ordering her to deliver Captain Tomlin's map to them." "How long ago was that, Nancy?" her father inquired quickly. "At least half an hour." "Perhaps we can catch them," Carson Drew exclaimed. Leaving Ned to look for Nancy's car, he and his daughter drove home at top speed. Entering the house, they discovered Hannah Gruen down on her knees examining the telephone. "Nancy, you're safe!" she exclaimed joyfully. "Oh, I'm so relieved." "Did someone come here with a note from me?" Nancy asked anxiously. "Yes, a woman. She left about 10 minutes ago." "That was Irene Brown." "I guessed as much, so I tried to call the police, but the telephone wires had been cut." "You gave her the map?" Nancy asked. "That was what you requested me to do," the housekeeper responded. "Yes, I did. Oh, I can't blame you. You had no way of knowing that I didn't want you to carry out the instructions." "All the same, I guessed it from the wording in your note," the housekeeper declared, ending the suspense. "I gave Mrs. Brown a map, but it will never do her and her husband any good, and it serves them right." "Oh, Hannah, you're wonderful!" Nancy laughed happily and hugged her. "How did you manage to outwit her?" "It was very easy. I knew you kept both sections of the map in your desk, Captain Tomlin's original and the copy of Mr. Smith's portion. I found an old piece of parchment in the desk and tore it diagonally. Then I quickly traced the original, leaving out many details and making several changes." "Mrs. Brown never once suspected?" Nancy asked, chuckling. "No, she must have thought that what I gave her was genuine, because she thanked me sweetly and went away." "Hannah, you're as clever as any detective of my acquaintance," Mr. Drew said with a grin. "I'm really grateful," Nancy added. "There's just one thing that troubles me," Hannah said. "I copied the name of the island on the paper." "Let's not worry about that," said Mr. Drew, "since you left out some of the directions." While the housekeeper was preparing a late dinner, Mr. Drew went to a neighbor's and called the telephone company to report the cut wire. A repairman was sent at once, and within a short time the Drews' phone was back in service. As they finished dinner, the telephone rang and Nancy rose to answer it. She recognized Ned's voice. "Hello, Nancy," he said, talking hurriedly. "I found your car. I'll bring it over as soon as I can. Right now I'm at the police station and Chief McGinnis wants you to come at once." "Now?" "Yes. Fred and Irene Brown have been taken into custody. The chief wants an identification." "Be there in a minute. Bye." Nancy and her father went immediately to the police station. To their delight, they learned that Ned had led the police to 47 White Street and aided them in nabbing the Browns when the couple had returned to release Nancy. "May we talk with them?" she asked the police chief. "Go ahead, and good luck. We haven't been able to get a word out of either of them." Mr. Drew and Nancy talked with the couple. They learned nothing from Fred, who denied the kidnapping of Nancy from Emerson. "Forget it," he said. "It's the word of 2 against 1. Irene Brown proved to be less discreet. Nancy played upon the woman's feelings by intimating that Spike Doty was in jail and had made damaging revelations which implicated the couple. "Why, the double-crosser!" Mrs. Brown cried furiously. "He was the one who first learned about the fortune, and now he tries to throw all the blame on us." Then you've been working with him? Carson Drew asked quietly. Not anymore. Rourke, perhaps? Nancy inquired, watching the woman's face intently. Never heard of him, Irene Brown answered, but her eyes wavered, indicating to her questioners that she was not telling the truth. What did you do with the map you obtained from our housekeeper? Carson Drew demanded. He had learned from the police that the paper had not been found in the Browns' possession. We sold it, Irene answered briefly. To Rourke? The lawyer asked. Look, I don't have to tell you anything. Realizing she had talked too much, Irene Brown fell into a sullen silence and refused to answer any more questions. Before leaving headquarters, Nancy and Mr. Drew again talked with Chief McGinnis. I'll have the Browns held without bail, the chief said. Kidnapping is a serious charge. Although the man and his wife were behind bars, Nancy remained uneasy. Spike Doty and the mysterious Mr. Rourke were free, and both were determined to get the Tomlin treasure. Have they learned the location of Little Palm Island? Nancy wondered. Are they on their way to it? She phoned Mrs. Chatham, who was as impatient as Nancy to get the treasure hunt underway. The widow telephoned Captain Stryver, urging him to speed preparations so that the Primrose could sail from New York as soon as possible. I can have her ready by tomorrow, he said. If I had a little more time, though, I could be more selective about the crew. We can't afford to waste another day, the woman told him. The next morning, Carson Drew, the Marvins, and the Fanes said goodbye to their daughters at the airport. Wish I were going along, the lawyer said. Have a good time and bring home the treasure. At least I'll get a good tan, Nancy laughed, squeezing her father's hand and kissing him. The traveling group consisted of Mrs. Chatham, Trixie, the three Smiths, Bill Tomlin, and Nancy's special friends. Bess's date, Dave Evans, was a blond, rangy, green-eyed boy who was on the Emerson football team. Bert Eddleton, George's friend, was also blond but shorter and husky. He, too, played on the team. With a grin, Bert said, A treasure hunt on a lonely island should have at least one pirate. I'm applying for the job. Dave called, I'll give you a patch for one eye. The others laughed. The trip to New York was fast. Taxis were hailed, and the group headed for the dock and their first glimpse of the Primrose. Isn't she beautiful? Bess exclaimed, gazing at the trim yacht. As Nancy looked at the ship, her attention was diverted by a small piece of paper which had just blown from behind a crate on the dock. Wondering if it had been dropped by someone aboard the Primrose, she went over to pick it up. The next instant she stared in astonishment. A hand-printed message on the sheet read, Meet you on the dock Wednesday, midnight. Spike. That was last night, Nancy thought. Her friends, with the exception of Ned, were already going aboard and being greeted by Captain Stryver. Find something? Ned asked Nancy. She showed him the paper. Wow, he exclaimed. I wonder who received this. Ned, I think we should tell the captain that Spike might have placed a bomb aboard or tampered with the machinery. The two reported the incident at once, and a thorough search was made. Nothing was found. Although Nancy was relieved, she had an uneasy feeling that something was amiss. She would certainly keep her eyes open. The Primrose was a comfortable, seaworthy craft which plowed through deep waves with scarcely a roll. Even so, Mrs. Chatham, a poor sailor, soon was confined to her cabin with a mild case of seasickness. Ellen and Trixie shared an adjoining stateroom. Left mostly to themselves, Nancy, Ned, and the other couples thoroughly enjoyed the daylight hours on deck. The second night out, they danced to records and held an impromptu entertainment. Bill Tomlin, a talented guitar player, was asked to accompany Ellen. The young people would not let her stop until she had sung several selections. All applauded her loudly. Finally, she begged off, saying she must put Trixie to bed. Come back soon, Nancy urged. Trixie began to pout. Ellen's my roommate. I want her to stay with me. Ellen merely smiled and promised a bedtime story, which Nancy was sure would put the child to sleep. A few minutes later, Bill Tomlin slipped away from the group and followed Ellen down port side. Presently their voices, half talking, half laughing, could be heard against the sound of splashing waves. The other couples strolled about the deck, enjoying the mild breezes and stopping to watch the moon's reflection ripple on the water. "Nancy," said Ned, "since there's no trouble on the Primrose, I hope you'll forget about mysteries or treasure until we get to the island. It'll be one—" "Help! Help!" a girl's cry interrupted Nancy's answer. "That sounds like Bess!" Nancy exclaimed. "It is," Ned said. He pointed to a figure just surfacing the water. End of chapter 17.